When Dr. Eleanor Marlowe discovered the biomechanical interface that allowed severed spinal nerves to reroute through a neural prosthesis. She wasn't trying to make history. She simply wanted to save her father. He'd been paralyzed in a construction accident when she was 12. And she never forgot the sound of his laughter turning into silence the day he gave up hope of walking again. Eleanor worked tirelessly in her lab, alone for hours, fueled by caffeine and the haunting memory of her father staring at the legs he could no longer feel. By the time she reached her breakthrough, her father had been gone for a decade. She called it the Phoenix Unit, named for its ability to resurrect movement from paralysis. The first trials were cautious. Lab rats, then primates. After rigorous testing and revisions, she was ready for human trials. 20 people who'd resigned themselves to wheelchairs for life volunteered. It wasn't just about the science. They had faith in her. All 20 walked again. The Phoenix Unit became the medical miracle of the decade. Eleanor was hailed as a genius. Though she hated the attention. She didn't invent the device for accolades. She did it to give people their lives back. Over the next 3 years, her invention helped more than 2,000 people walk again. Stroke victims, accident survivors, soldiers who'd lost their mobility. Each became a success story. Hospitals around the world implemented the Phoenix Unit. And Eleanor's company became a juggernaut of medical technology. But as the euphoria of her achievements began to fade, strange reports emerged. It started subtly. Patients began describing an odd sensation. A second pair of limbs they could feel but not see. They called them their shadow legs. The phenomenon seemed harmless at first. A mere neurological quirk of the rerouted pathways. Eleanor and her team ran tests but found nothing wrong. Then came the dreams. Patients reported eerily similar nightmares. In them, their shadow legs moved independently, pulling them into strange, dark places they didn't want to go. One woman described being dragged toward a black abyss filled with whispers. Another man woke screaming, claiming he'd been forced to march into a vast, featureless void. Eleanor dismissed the reports as the subconscious grappling with trauma. The brain is a complex organ, she explained to the media. What you're hearing is the mind adjusting to new neural pathways. But then the disappearances began. The first was a man named Victor Klein, a former firefighter who'd been paralyzed in a blaze. He'd been one of Eleanor's first success stories. One day, Victor vanished from his apartment. There were no signs of forced entry. No struggle. Just his empty wheelchair lying on its side. Then, 2 more patients disappeared in the same week. Security footage showed one man, a paraplegic who'd regained his mobility, walking out of his house in the middle of the night and vanishing into a forest. The footage was unsettling. His movements were stiff, almost mechanical, like a puppet being yanked on invisible strings. Panic spread. Social media exploded with conspiracy theories. Some claimed the Phoenix Unit was malfunctioning and controlling its users. Others whispered about supernatural forces. That Eleanor had tampered with something she didn't understand. Eleanor, desperate for answers, decided to test the Phoenix Unit on herself. She'd been reluctant to try it before, as she had no physical impairments. But now she needed to know. She connected the interface to her spine, activated the device, and waited. At first, nothing happened. Then she felt them. Her shadow legs. It was as if a phantom version of herself had been overlaid onto her body. She could feel her real legs, solid and warm, but also a ghostly pair that twitched and flexed with a will of their own. The nightmares came the first night. She dreamed she was walking through a vast, empty city under a blood-red sky. Her shadow legs moved her, step by step, toward the edge of an enormous pit. She could hear voices rising from the abyss, thousands of them, crying out in fear. Eleanor woke in a cold sweat. But the feeling didn't fade. The shadow legs were still there, restless, pulling her toward something unseen. Desperate, she re-examined the Phoenix Unit's code and the neural mappings. That's when she found it. A signal embedded in the software that shouldn't have been there. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it pulsed like a heartbeat. She traced the signal's origin and discovered something horrifying. The Phoenix Unit didn't just reconnect nerves. It acted as a beacon, broadcasting its users' neural patterns into the void. Somehow, the device had opened a doorway to somewhere else, and something on the other side was listening. Eleanor's lab became a fortress as she worked to shut down the signal. But she was too late. The disappearances escalated. Entire hospitals that had installed Phoenix units reported patients walking out in the dead of night, never to return. And then, one night, Eleanor's shadow legs took control. She fought against them with all her strength. But it was no use. They dragged her out of her home, down the empty streets, and into the forest. The whispers grew louder as she stumbled forward, her body no longer her own. At the edge of a clearing, she saw them, thousands of people standing in perfect rows, their bodies stiff, their eyes empty. They all turned to her in unison, their shadow legs shimmering faintly in the moonlight. A voice spoke, not with sound but directly into her mind. "Thank you for opening the door," it said. "We needed vessels to walk your world. And now? We will walk forever." Eleanor tried to scream, but her shadow legs marched her forward, into the ranks of the others. The last thing she saw was the black abyss yawning before her, the whispers rising into a deafening roar as she fell.